Hey guys, my name is Loco Doco, the better looking host of Listen Loco, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
Burnout is a serious and seemingly very real phenomenon in esports. I mean, you see complaints from even winning players, champions, about how the circuit is too packed and they need more time off. They feel stretched thin across practice, official games, fan aspects, sponsor obligations. Sometimes they have to decide as a result, like, do I do one more year? Almost as though they're just promising themselves, if you just do one more year of it, get the salary, try and accomplish something, you can have the rest of your career off. You can take your time off. It doesn't sound like when you hear people in sometimes the NBA or the NHL say, I want to play as long as I can. I'll play till the very end until I'm too injured or no one wants me. You don't always get that kind of a sense or a feel from the star players, the best players in esports. Similarly, on the other end of the equation, when you want to talk about the lesser players, the players who maybe aren't accomplishing great things and winning championships, the number of these players who present what appear to be signs of mental strain, perhaps even bordering on mental illness directly, problems with anxiety, depression. We've heard many of these stories, and often this is contributed to by a very, very harsh, intense work environment, expectations that can sometimes be unreasonable for a teenager, looking around at the demands placed upon you, not even just literally based by your team and your teammates, but sometimes the expectation of, here's the team that's beating you, here's what they're doing, why aren't you doing that or more? You often hear it said by fans, like, why aren't you practicing more rather than talking trash if you are not winning? The kind of a silly logic, but these are the kind of expectations people place upon you. Now, I've already done a video in the past about burnout and some of the reasons why I think it happens and some of the ways that different games, for example, CSGO and its open circuit, I think offset some of that. Moving out of team houses was a big deal. But what I wanted to address in this video is how we actually get to a world where we don't have burnout in this particular fashion, like widespread across the industry, a lot of it not even talked about, just taken and accepted, like, this is a dream job. If you want to do it, you're going to have to give your life for it in some senses. Because it was a lot easier, like in that video, to mainly address the Western scene and say, right, in games like League of Legends, LCS, LEC, in games like Overwatch League, in Overwatch, there you have this Western scene where there's a lot of Western players still. If there are imported players or Korean players, they can either themselves adapt to the slower Western pace, which even in itself is burning people out, but isn't as crazy as the high-tempo Korean intensity of practice. So what you tend to find is Korean players who are imports to Western teams either learn themselves to chill. I think you've seen this from players like Ganked by Mom, like a couple of the Koreans in Overwatch, or actually they end up getting a bit frustrated and depressed with their teammates. Like they look at their teammate who isn't doing that great in the game, isn't grinding his hours away on solo queue, isn't trying as hard as they are, putting in the necessary elbow grease to get better. And so coming from their background, they just get a bit depressed actually. That's one of the reasons why a principle that's often worked with Koreans is to get two Koreans at once. So they have someone else to relate to, someone else to talk to feel comfortable on. Other option, failing that, get a Korean coach, someone who can speak to them, hear their concerns, can tell them things are done differently in the West. This player is trying in the context of his culture. Actually, he is doing work. Like, he is gradually improving. He's not Korean though, can't have the same expectations of him. Because over in Korea, their notion of work ethic and duty means I think they will always keep up these hours and they will always burn themselves out. They'll both literally mandate it to some degree in Korea, and the players themselves, even if you didn't demand it, would just do it anyway. They feel as though that's what they owe to their team, to the fans, to the chance that they got a lifestyle here, the fact that they're taking a divergent career path than what their parents very much probably wanted for them, to be a doctor or some high-level job with a nice degree from Seoul University, and instead they've dropped out at 14 and become a video game player. So at least they're going to become the best video game player. They're going to be incredibly diligent. They're going to try and make their family and their culture proud through playing in that sense. We've heard of some of the crazy stories, like when Hart, the support player of Samsung Blue, was living in the same team environment as Samsung White's Mata. Mata was already known as a player who at times could go through epic practice sessions, and even he was impressed with Hart, who he said was sleeping something crazy, like 4 hours a day, to allow him to get extra solo queuing outside of all the screen skim sessions. Similarly, when Flash, the StarCraft Brood War and later StarCraft 2 player, was the best player in the world, he used to sleep something ridiculous like 4 or 5 hours himself. The rest of the time he'd be grinding, practicing, playing with the team, practicing with the team, playing team league matches and individual league matches, and going all the way to the final of all of them and being expected to win all of them, else be considered a failure, a letdown, someone who underwhelmed in terms of expectations. Similarly, you look at the hierarchy of those teams, that's one of the things that will always also also keep them correct. Because when you join a team, you basically join as a nobody, even if, in terms of raw skill, you are the star player of the team now. You join and you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy, and you have to prove yourself to the veterans. You have to show that you can work as hard as them, that you can learn from them, that you can advance and listen to coaches and put in the hours they tell you to and improve in the areas you want, because you're joining their team. They're not having you join their team as much as you're joining their team. An established social hierarchy where, just as if you join the military, etc., you're expected to eat a little shit first and get hazed a bit, and then once you show you can handle that, then they might accept you and you might be a proper part of the team. So for me, the problem here is the players themselves aren't going to get us out of this world. Left to their own devices, especially the Korean players, they'll play just as hard as they do now. They'll continue to be godlike players, but they'll burn out much, much faster than they needed to, or at all, if they ever needed to. Because one of the problems with this topic is you can't really see the harm that is done by burnout. It reminds me a little bit of what's happened in American football, with the whole reason why this whole concussion/CTE issue has taken so long to become mainstream is because it didn't visibly show always. Obviously, you can do a cranial nerve exam, see how someone is, etc. But because it doesn't just show, like you look at the guy, get up, well, seems all right to me. You don't know that internally he can't remember anything in the last 5 minutes. His brain's all over the place. Later on, he doesn't know he played a game. Because people didn't see those aspects, it was easier to ignore them for a long time and pretend there wasn't an issue. It was just in American football about your body. Is the body of the running back worn out? Has this guy who's a defensive player himself taken too many hits, given too many hits? Can he play anymore? That's all people really worried about. So for me, the problem here is you can see strain and wear and tear when it's on the body. You can see the muscles that are injured, how it limits motion, etc. You can't necessarily see it when it comes to the brain. The reason in sports they limit how much you practice, even on a physical level, is they don't want a guy on their dime who they've planned their franchise around getting injured and then fucking over the franchise, leaving them without a star player, etc., someone out of the ability to do a job. So they go even further in traditional sports. Some of them have contract clauses that say you can't do extreme sports like snowboarding, surfing, etc., because they don't want you getting injured in the off season and then not being able to play the main season. So the problem I have with letting players decide their practice hours, and especially then also allowing them to have their personal practice hours, which if they want to put themselves over the top means on top of the practice hours for the team, and the practice hour for the team is already quite frankly stretching it, is you're going to get this arms race of practice because these people are competitive. These people would kill themselves practicing if you won 10,000 or 100,000 or $10 million. That's how eager some of these people are, because they play for more than the money. In fact, they oftentimes don't play for the money. They play to be the best. They play to improve. They play to compete for the true essence of competition. So for me, the reason that you have to worry here is because I've already seen this happen in mixed martial arts, another of my favorite hobbies to follow. Because in the UFC, this is the most famous example of mixed martial arts, but it's the same all around the world, everyone takes part in weight cutting. So coming from the history of other combat sports like boxing and like wrestling, for example, everyone's in weight classes where they fight 155 pounds. You both have to weigh 155 pounds or less to fight in that division. 170, you all have to weigh 170. 205 for light heavyweight. Everyone understands the concept. But what people might not know if they don't know the sport of mixed martial arts is the guy who fights in the 205 division isn't 205 pounds. What he does is he probably weighs 220 pounds. And then what happens, I'm not going to convert this to kilograms. You'll just have to understand the sport's done in pounds. It's American. When they are in a situation where they do the weight cutting, they basically figure out how much is the most I can reliably cut, that I'm not going to fail the weight cut, but cut as much as possible, if possible, to get into a weight class below what I walk around at, so that hopefully if I'm fighting someone who's cut less weight, when I put all the weight back on after the weigh-ins, I weigh much more than him, and I now have an extra advantage, which is my physical weight advantage. If I'm lying on him, smothering him, holding him with my strength, etc., they're trying to all get an edge. It becomes an arms race to see who can cut the most weight and get into the lowest weight class. Now, the reason why that's silly is because weight cutting does fuck you up. It dehydrates your body and your brain, and even if you rehydrate afterwards, it's not the same as if you'd been able to fight at whatever your normal body weight is. You'd be in much better condition. And this is after you've done a training camp and before you have a fight where people are going to punch you in the head and try and choke you unconscious. So in this scenario, as Joe Rogan's often pointed out on his podcast, if there was some way everyone could just have a gentleman's agreement, we'll all just fight in whatever weight class our normal walking around weight is, and therefore no one will have to go through this. Because since we're all doing it, Why are we all fucking our bodies up when we're already going to have a fight that's incredibly strenuous? Why not just all agree to fight at the proper weight classes? The problem is, as I alluded to, there's the arms race element. And unless you mandate it or cleverly set up the weighing aspect, which they've tried to do over the years, but they've never fully succeeded with, you're just not going to get people follow it because they're going to think, if I can get an edge, I'll get an edge. And even more so, the arms race element of it compels you to do it, because if you don't weight cut and you're fighting at that weight class and the guy coming in, even though you'll have a slight advantage and you haven't weight cut, if he then weighs 30 pounds more than you in the fight, that's a big advantage for him. You're going to be in bad shape. So you need to fight at a low weight class so you can even up the weight disadvantage in that sense. So the point is, if everyone in esports could somehow agree to practice less, everyone could still be very, very good without the same burnout. Now, that's obviously not going to happen on its own. So one way I could see it happening is, I think teams have to mandate less overall raw playing the game practice hours as an expectation, so that if they make their practice hours, I don't know, 4 to 6 hours in a day, and then a player himself either works 1 or 2 hours, or if he's incredibly diligent, maybe he works 4 hours extra just by himself to be the absolute best, some faker, heart level person, oozy eye, then he's still only doing 10 hours in a day. He's still got plenty of time off to sleep, plenty of time for other activities like exercise, a personal life, and he can still be a very, very good player. Now, one of the ways you could do this as a team, in my opinion, is substitute things out that would in the past have been replaced by raw hours in the game. So have the team work the scrim blocks, but then have more hours that are work on mental coaching, how you think about the game, what you were feeling in this scenario, some techniques and strategies, mindfulness, etc., CBT. Then I'd also have more hours that are just theory work and VOD review, going over games. You don't have to be playing in it. It's a different type of experience, a little bit more passive, but some active thought going there, more thinking rather than playing with the hands, you're not getting RSI, etc. Activities also I'd add in, which have nothing to do with the game, but still keep you active, let you bond with your teammates, get to know them a little bit better. These factors should be considered to offset some of the raw hours people play. Then you let the outliers kill themselves with practice if they want. If there's some Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps level dude who just wants to practice all the time to be the best who ever played or be the best he can ever be at the game, you let him do that. You're not going to limit his freedom. He can do that. If he chooses to burn himself out, some of them are amazing that they don't burn out, but if they chooses to do that, that's on him. The fact that it's the expectation for everyone else is part of the problem for me. I'd even throw in, I'm amazed more teams don't literally have a member of the coaching staff force players at the beginning of each day to do those RSI exercises, doing all this shit where you fully open up all the muscles, you do the opposite reaction to what you're doing when you move the mouse, etc. And therefore you offset or delay or start to repair what would be an injury otherwise before it gets too bad, before it gets to the point where you're out of the game, even on the physical level, not even talking mentally at this point in time. Because the sad thing about burnout in this respect is when you do it, when you engage in that arms race, the ones who are the real victims, you don't notice. They just get cast by the wayside, they fail, they don't do well in the game. It's the people who make it and are amazing who unfortunately are simultaneously the best and the worst advertisement for this kind of intense over-practice, overloading of your schedule, because they become amazing. They become the best players we have ever seen in esports. Flash, J-Dong, Bisu. You go to League of Legends, you've got Faker, you've got people, some of my favourites. Flame was a very, very diligent player once upon a time in his career. Mad Life. You go and look in a game like Overwatch, you have Jonak and Prophet, these Carpe, these outrageously good individual players. So the problem is, it will make them amazing, but the question is, at what cost of their career, and possibly even some aspect of their mental stamina, their sanity maybe even. As the old saying goes, famously used in the movie Blade Runner, the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. So for me, the problem is, I can appreciate people who individually choose to do this, but when people feel obliged to do it, like they have to do it, and it just becomes the standard across the industry, I think it's a tragedy for our scene that we don't have more of these young guys who are competing around for longer into their 30s, maybe going to their 40s. In theory, there's no reason they couldn't do it, but burnout's a very good reason not to, and it's very hard to imagine how we're going to get to a world without burnout. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, NateDOhDoubleG, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Wendelful, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Daniel Olivar, Chi Mao, JDubs, Kolja G, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion and weixz. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers or who the guests are for my upcoming videos? Maybe you want to take part in a monthly donator discussion with me. Well, all of these perks and more are available at the Patreon link in the description box below.